So when there's a lot of top pair type hands missing in your opponent's range, that's probably going to have a big knock-on effect to what your strategy looks like. Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another video. My name's Gareth James for mttpokerschool.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at out of position c-betting. So a few weeks ago, I made a video all about crushing the flop in tournaments, and one of the comments at the bottom of that video was, can you do a follow-up for out of position? I do think it's a spot that a lot of players get wrong. It's very, very different from playing in position. So let's get into it. Number one, equities run much closer together. Let's take a look at this graph. So what we've got here then is 30 big blinds, average equities for the pre-flop raiser, whether they're in position or out of position. First of all, then we've got EP versus the button, so out of position, 53.5%. And then EP versus big blind, you can see is much, much higher, 61.9%. Same goes for low jack versus button, 51.8, low jack versus big blind, 61, and then cutoff versus button, 49.2, and cutoff versus big blind, 59.8. So when we're in position, we generally just have a lot more equity. What's really important to understand here is how the two ranges interact. Now, we're going to be talking about this later on, but what I'm talking about here is always thinking about the two ranges and how they interact with the flop. Generally speaking, when you're playing against the big blind's got a really, really wide range, and very often you have a lot stronger range, and this is why the average equity is a lot higher when you're playing in position. When you're playing out of position, the button isn't going to have hands like 9 deuce suited or 8-6 off, for example. So it's got a much stronger range, and therefore the equities run a lot closer together. Now what this means is that we should do a lot more checking. Number two, you should c-bet a lot less out of position. This is the biggest one. If there's one thing that you can take away from today's video, it's c-bet a lot less when you're out of position. Now, of course, all of these hints and tips are about playing out of position as a pre-flop raiser in single raised pots and heads up. Obviously, there would be different strategies for playing multi-way. So I just wanted to make it clear that we're playing single raised pots heads up. Okay, so let's take a look at this then. 30 big blinds in position versus out of position. Average c-betting frequencies by flop type or texture. So I've got the types or textures along the bottom. And let's take a look then. So first of all then, on two Broadway boards, EP versus button, the average c-betting frequency is 72%, but EP versus big blind, 97%. On ABB, it's 74 versus 99, so huge difference there again. We've got ABX then, a lot more checking on an ABX board. 58% betting versus 96% when we're playing EP versus big blind. Ace XX, only 36% betting, but then 98% for when playing against a big blind. And I'm not going to go through all of these guys, but you get the idea that when we're out of position, EP versus button, we're going to be doing a lot more checking and a lot less c-betting than if we were EP versus big blind. Interestingly, look at the low connected and low unconnected. We do see a drop-off in c-betting frequencies, but in both in position and out of position. Paired boards, decent amount of betting. We'll talk about paired boards a little bit later on. And trips boards just continue to be bet for a high frequency. We get to rainbow boards then. We're doing a lot more betting when we're in position. Same with flush draws. And definitely same with monotone boards. I'm going to take a look at those in a minute as well. This time then, low jack versus button and low jack versus big blind. Exactly the same things going on, guys. You can see that the one in red is when we're playing out of position. The average c-betting frequency is just a lot less. So I'm not sure I can do any more than this to show you the data and show you that you should be doing a lot less c-betting when you're playing out of position. And then finally, we'll take a look at the cutoff versus button and cutoff versus big blind. And this is where you're going to see a lot of checks. You can see those numbers now. Cutoff versus button, we're really not doing much betting at all. 20% on 2 Broadway, 28% on ABX, 21% on BBB, so 3 Broadways, 8% on Jack or 10 high with 2 low cards, and so on and so forth. So number 3, you can c-bet bigger on paired boards. So this might come as a bit of a surprise because in the last video that I did on playing the flop, I said that paired boards when you're playing in position versus the big blind were very frequently bet for a small size or check. Here you actually can use some bigger bet sizes. Let's just take a look at the next chart. So this is the chart from that last video, and just as a reminder, we just had a lot of small betting. Small betting in red, the big bet is in orange. So across the board, you can see even EP versus big blind all the way through to button versus big blind. There's just a lot of small betting used and not a lot of big betting used. Now, when we're playing out of position, now we've got 30 big blinds, average betting frequencies by size on paired boards, EP versus button, 27% small bet, 48% big bet, low jack versus button, 19% small bet, 38% big bet, and then cutoff versus button, 13% small bet and 18% big bet. So it's a huge difference, and I think it's really, really important to understand, really important that you don't use a small bet too frequently when playing out of position on paired boards. Number 4, check a lot more on monotone boards. So I showed you the graph earlier on looking at the different c betting frequencies on the different types and textures. So on monotone boards, let's take a look at this. So small bet, EP versus button, 27% small bet, 20% small bet for low jack versus button, and 9% small bet cutoff versus button. So a little bit of small betting in there. Big betting, a definite no-no, 3%, 5%. So really not a lot of big betting going on out of position in these examples. And then when it comes to check, now we've got 70% check on monotone boards, EP versus button, 77% check low jack versus button, and then 83% cutoff versus button. So you should do a lot more checking on monotone boards specifically. And number 5, always think about how the two ranges interact with the board. So let's take a quick look at betting frequencies on 10 high boards, 30 big blinds, EP versus button. And here you can see there's a decent amount of betting here. The only board really that stands out as being a high check is the monotone board, right? And we already talked about monotone boards. So why is this happening? Let's take a look at the ranges. So this is the opening range for the early position player, and this is the calling range for the button. And this is a 10 high board, and there's something missing for the button, which is a lot of those offsuit 10x hands, as you can see on the screen now. So whilst, we don't have full frequency of king 10 off, queen 10 off, jack 10 off ourselves, we do have full frequency ace 10 off, and a lot of the suited 10s, which the button does have as well. So when there's a lot of top pair type hands missing in your opponent's range, that's probably going to have a big knock-on effect to what your strategy looks like. So what I've done here is do a side-by-side comparison of the Range Explorer within PioSolver. Really useful tool. If you're not using it, it's definitely use it. It's really, really cool to be able to look at what you're doing with your range in terms of strategy, and also to see how many combos and what kind of proportion of your range is in each category. So like sets, two pairs, over pairs, top pair, etc. So at the bottom, you can see I've put out of position equity 53.9%. So we've got more equity already, but two pair plus is only 3.5%. You can see at the top as well. So you've got 2.6% sets and 0.9% two pair. Now, it's really important that you always look at it as a proportion of your range and don't just go straight to the number of combos, because you can see that, this is an example for top pair, but we've got 30.6 combos for top pair versus 18.1. So it's like almost double, except when it's a proportion of the range, it's 13.2 versus 10.2. So it's really important to focus on that and not just go, oh, we've got way more combos or they've got way more combos. It's always combos as a proportion of your entire range. So in terms of two pair plus, then you can see out of position at only 3.5%, and then in position has 5.2%. So you would think that given that the in position player has more really, really strong hands, that we would do a lot more checking. But don't forget that we have higher equity here. And then you can see that I've highlighted top pair. So already talked about this a moment ago, but we have, as the out of position player, 13.2% of our range is top pair, and versus 10.2% for the in position player. But there's other things that are driving this as well. The biggest one that I haven't highlighted here, I'll just bring this back in. You can see that over pairs for the out of position player, 10.4% versus 2.1% for the in position player. So when you're thinking about why the out of position player has more equity here, despite having two pair plus disadvantage, it's really driven by having way more top pairs and over pairs as a proportion of their range. All right, so in summary then, equities run much closer together, and this means that you should do a lot less c-betting and a lot more checking. You can c-bet bigger on paired boards out of position than you would when you're in position versus the big blind. You should definitely do a lot more checking on monotone boards. They really stood out, especially as we got like cutoff versus button. It was a really, really high frequency check. And then final point then, always think about how the two ranges interact with the board. It's really, really important that you don't just look at the advice here and then just, always bet big on paired boards, or, just check range on a monotone board. You're always thinking about how the two ranges are interacting. Obviously, I only looked at paired boards, monotone boards, and gave you a sort of overview of all the other textures as well. We didn't go into too much detail in there. But yeah, it's really important you think about how the two ranges are interacting with the board, who's going to have more advantages, what do the equities look like, who has top pair advantage or over pair advantage or two pair plus advantage as well. Really, really important to do that. Make sure you do that, and hopefully you'll be crushing out of position c-betting next time you play. All right, so I'm going to wrap things up there. Today we've been talking all about out of position c-betting. To be honest, we've barely scratched the surface. If you do want to find out more, I do have an online tournament poker course. Check out the link in the description down below. I'll be back soon with a brand new video, but until then, take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.